Hi, today is the day. I've been wanting to share about my relationship with alcohol for a very long time now. And I realized it wasn't going to come out in an email form. The best way to convey this story was through my voice. So here I am. Um, if you are here, I'm going to assume it's because you yourself have had an interesting, maybe complicated relationship with alcohol, or maybe you know someone who has. And I want to tell you that the reason this is important to me to share is because I think that I'm uniquely positioned to share about the complicated relationship I had with alcohol because I've just had a long history with it, starting from my mother, really, actually starting, I would say, from my family. So I come from a family of alcoholics. It runs in the family. My mother, growing up as a child, she was an alcoholic to this day, even in her 70s. It's something that she struggles with. For a long time, it was the bane of my existence, my difficult relationship with my alcoholic mother, and it has in many ways shaped and formed who I am today. And in addition to that, I my partner, Adam, is a recovering alcoholic. So he's been sober for 9 years now. And we didn't start dating until after he got sober, but I've known Adam and I have been friends since like we were 21 years old. We were actually roommates together. That's how I met him. He ended up being one of my roommates when in my first like house out of college, and those were some really crazy times. So I knew him as he was diving into the depths of his alcoholism, and then I obviously know him now as a sober person. And then in addition to all of that, like the triggers and the messiness of it all, I also drank extensively for years, since high school all through even my like early 30s, where it was a huge part of my identity, not just my life, but my identity. I identified as someone who drank and partied, and I to the degree where it was really hard for me to even imagine that I could live any other way. It never occurred to me. There are points in my life where it never even occurred to me that it was possible for me to live a life free of alcohol because I just took it at face value, which is a wonderful example of being unconscious, right? You just assume something is the way that it is because you just maybe don't have perspective or don't know anything different. So, and now where I am, I will get to this more later, but I have a very, I think, healthy and free relationship with alcohol. Um, and I share this for a couple of reasons. There's so many important aspects of this. This conversation is not about drinking alcohol. Should you drink alcohol or should you not drink alcohol? This isn't about whether drinking is good or bad, right or wrong, because the truth is, in many instances, nothing is good or bad, but it's our relationship to something that is like the biggest delineator, I would say, of like how if something is good or bad. Does it cause us suffering? Like that's a really important question, right? And the tricky thing about alcohol is that for a lot of people, it becomes a moralistic thing, which is why I think I know some people who don't drink and they feel like they need to like tiptoe around the subject because they don't want to make other people feel bad, because they don't want to make it seem like they're saying, oh, alcohol is bad. And I'm, so altruistic and I'm like on my high horse telling you that drinking is bad. I don't feel that way because I don't think drinking is good or bad. But what I want for you and what I think is most important about all of this is, are you free? This is why I think this is very much a spiritual subject, because spirituality to me, above many, many things, is that it's about your own personal liberation. Are you a free person? Are you living freely the way that you want to? And are you living from a sovereign place? Are you sovereign in which, meaning you're not living in reaction to something? You're not doing something because you're triggered or because you're avoiding something, or you're not doing something based on something outside of you. You're just in your own being, in your own presence, and you drink essentially because it's a sovereign choice. It's not compulsive. And again, it's not like you're being peer pressured or because you're avoiding anything. You drink because you want to, and you're free, and you're not suffering because of it. And I think for many of us, alcohol, just like anything else, can be a pathway or a teacher into our own liberation, our own sovereignty, our own spiritual alignment. So if you struggle with alcohol, chances are alcohol is going to be one of your teachers, right? So the other thing that I want to say about this is, right, let me make sure I mention this caveat before I even dive into my story, is that there are different kinds of, there are different levels of addiction that people have with alcohol. There is straight up addiction. And I want to be clear, I am not an alcoholic. And I actually feel very, very fortunate to say that. I only know this now. I didn't realize this before, but I don't actually have addictive tendencies. I thought that I used to because of how much I drank. And in hindsight, I realized that was much more circumstantial. I'm really fortunate. I know people who have very addictive personalities. Again, my partner being one of them. He gets into something and he will just like get hooked into it. Like, if he gets really interested in like any kind of project or hobby or something that might bring him comfort, like he has those mental, like I really, it's a genetic thing, a mental thing where he can get really hooked into something. My mother, my brother, they have like addictive personalities. I'm someone, honestly, who to this day, again, I used to smoke cigarettes all throughout college. And the truth is, I like smoking cigarettes. I liked it. I was never someone who didn't like smoking cigarettes. To this day, if someone offered me a cigarette, someone could give me a cigarette, I could smoke it, enjoy it, and still not need to have more of it. I can just cut myself off, which I understand is not everyone's situation and is very, very, I wouldn't say rare, but that's not everyone's situation. And so in a lot of ways, I can only speak from this place, which is very, very different from someone who actually is an alcoholic. So the caveat is like, if you actually do feel like you're an alcoholic, like you wake up and you're thinking about it all the time. You're afraid of going somewhere because you're afraid there's not going to be alcohol. Your body feels withdrawal, all these different things. That's a different story. This is where I actually really do believe in Alcoholics Anonymous. AA, I think, can be really, really freaking helpful. But that's a whole nother story. And that's for you and your close ones to assess. Like, that's a big topic. If you are an alcoholic, no shame, go and get help. But a lot of you watching this, I think there are a lot of people who struggle with alcohol and drinking, and they don't fall into the bucket of being an alcoholic. And like something like AA really might not resonate with them. But it still brings them suffering because they're drinking when they know that they don't want to be, or they know that their quality of life is being affected because of drinking. So this is what I mean by like varying degrees. Yes, there's such a thing as alcohol, being a true addict. And again, I've experienced that because of, my family and my loved ones. And to me, addiction is no fucking joke. It's really serious. It's like one of the greatest tragedies, I believe, of our lifetime and of our humanity. And if that's the case, then, you should be getting support. And then there's people who I think are more like me, who like you don't identify with being an alcoholic, yet you see that it's like your relationship with alcohol is causing you struggling, right? It's causing you grief. I have hair in my face. So jumping into my own personal story, as I referred to earlier, my mother was essentially an alcoholic my entire life, which was incredibly traumatic. As you can imagine, the trauma that comes with that. She also was diagnosed with a lot of mental illnesses, which is so interesting because I actually, a lot of the clients that I attract, like not even trying, are people who have, difficult relationships with mothers, have parents who were addicts, lots of like codependent kind of stuff, which was very much my story for a really long time. And that's where, a lot of the trauma came from. And so just as a young person, and if you know anyone who's ever struggled with alcohol, like, you know how messy that gets, the the bargaining that you do with people. Like, I remember trying to, like, water down her whiskey bottles, or I would like throw her whiskey down the sink and she would, like, get really violent with me. There were moments where she would drive me to the liquor store when I was I don't know, maybe like in fifth grade, sixth grade. And she was like banned from the liquor store by our house. And so she sent me in as a sixth grader to go buy liquor for her. And I, obviously didn't want to, but I was kind of forced into it. And somehow I would just walk into these stores and the guys behind the counter would look at me with such like pity and sorrow in their face. And I think they sold me alcohol because they knew my mom was waiting outside. They sold me alcohol even though they shouldn't have, but I think they honestly just felt really bad for me. And I grew up going to AA meetings. Like, she went through like all these different like a series of like recovery, and in and out of AA and in and out of recovery and getting sober and then like falling off the wagon. And that was like a lot of my childhood, and a lot of the times she wasn't around. So as a result, as you can imagine, when I was young, I hated alcohol. I didn't understand why anyone would drink. To me, it was the devil. And I vowed that I would never drink. Then, of course, high school came along and a lot of things changed. Some of them being the fact that I turned into, I think it was always in me, but I had a very rebellious streak. I mean, maybe, who knows, maybe it was because of my childhood, but I loved partying. I was very social. I found solace in my social life because my home life was a disaster. And I didn't, honestly, I sure maybe drinking in high school, like in part was due to like peer pressure. I'm sure that was part of it. But in reality, I also think it was like, I was just curious and I was jaded and I was wanted to have a good time. And I was just like, fuck all this. I'm just going to enjoy myself and see what this life is about. And so I would say, I don't know, for those of you who don't know my part of my story, and I use quotations around the word stories because it's funny, like when you start to grow out of something, it's hard for you to even identify or relate to past parts of yourself. But my story is that I, lived a very reckless, wild life. It was fun and it was crazy, and I lived with abandon. And as you can imagine, there it was genuinely fun, but sometimes fun can simultaneously exist with low self-esteem, self-hate, like just not taking care of myself, self-abandonment, feeling really lost. I was like, my anxiety was like through the fucking roof. I was just really, really different from how I am now. I think, my older friends can remember that version of me, but people who meet me now, I think if I ever do mention it, they're always kind of surprised because I think I just seem so different from that version. I mean, I'm like, here I am with my green smoothie and shit. But yeah, that was my life for like, I guess you could say even the majority of my life. Lots of partying, lots of drugs, living in Philly, in New York City, just being like a crazy, like almost wannabe anarchist, kind of like a punk rock girl, kind of like even when I wasn't even a punk rock girl anymore, when I was just living in New York, I was just living fast and hard and recklessly and with abandon. And drinking, again, was huge because it was a huge part of my social life. And culturally, it was huge. Culturally, it still is huge. You will begin to notice if you choose to reduce the amount of drinking that you do or change your lifestyle or whatever. It's jarring at first how prevalent drinking is, to the degree that sometimes you'll go somewhere still, and if you're not drinking, people are like, oh, like, what's wrong, why aren't you drinking? Or if you go to a restaurant and you don't order a drink, people are like, oh, you're not going to order a drink, like just because it's like so in the dominant culture. But again, in my experience, all that fades. Like, you notice it at first because it's different, it's uncomfortable, and now I'm in a point where like, it's not even in my reality anymore, because you only notice things that bother you. Once it stops bothering you, you're not going to notice it anymore. So that, and I just always assumed that like drinking was going to be a big part of my life. But again, to go back to where it caused suffering, and this is might be where some of you will be able to relate, especially if you're watching this video, is that it was fun, and it stopped being fun at some point, where, the hangovers were just, I wasn't 20 anymore. And so the hangovers were just not worth it. And I felt like my quality of life I was abusing my body. My quality of life was going down. I felt depleted after a while, and I was really, really tired. And there were moments in my life where I also noticed like a lot of my relationships were really based around partying and drinking and were more superficial. Not all of them, by the way, but I would say it doesn't feel as authentic. Yeah, as it, I guess my life does feel now, or it doesn't feel as grounded. There was also a feeling of maybe like boredom, and I was just filling my life with like, wanting something to do, or wanting the drama or the excitement, or needing the stimulation, or in a lot of cases, like not avoiding and numbing, right? Because you're just like, something's going on, you're really stressed out. For me, it was like work, and I was always so stressed out about work, or maybe like some guy situation, or just feeling like all of these different things that I wasn't really addressing in my life. Alcohol came in, and it was just like it was a balm. It was like an easy way to numb everything. And the big change happened and I think oftentimes for people, when they change their relationship with alcohol, it's because you decide to make a big change in your life. So that was my situation. I know a lot of people who've also done it differently, who have stayed where they are in life, and that they've been really intentional about drinking less. But for me, what I did was there's a lot more to this, but I had this sort of realization that I wanted to move back to Taiwan and be with my parents and heal my relationship with my mother. And it was like a real important, like spiritual healing time in my life. And that's when I decided to leave New York. And there was a lot of reasons why I left, but it was like a big deal that I was leaving New York. And I was like, okay, I was doing a lot of soul searching. I was doing a lot of meditating. That's when I started doing meditating. And I realized like, okay, I need to make a change in my life. And so I took this leap of faith and left my like busy New York life to move to Taiwan. And for me, the reason that was really fortunate was because it was easier. It was easier for me to make big life changes because I changed my circumstances, right? So once I got to Taiwan, I wasn't surrounded by a huge social group of people. I was living with my parents, so I wasn't like getting wasted and coming home, like at 4 o'clock in the morning, the way that I was in New York. And it was a really important time in my life where I got to heal and rest and do a lot of self-reflection and like repair my relationships with my family. And really that whole time in my life was about healing my relationship with my family. But as a result of just changing my circumstances, my lifestyle really changed. And I just, once I got to Taiwan, I realized, I was like, oh my God, I am freaking tired. I've just been going hard for like 15 years. I feel like the first couple of weeks that I got there, I just like slept because I just was so burned out, and it had totally wore out my body. So that I share that because circumstantially I realized, okay, I don't want to drink so much anymore. And it made it really easy to do so. And I still had drinks every once in a while. I'd go out with some friends or some family, but the big change was that my social circle changed, and my job changed, and those circumstances changed. And so I didn't feel tempted to drink as much. And the point that I want to make is not everyone can do a huge life change like this. If you can, and you're feeling pulled to, a lot of people do, they take this big leap of faith and they make a huge change, and they change their life. And I also know a lot of people who don't do that, who continue with the same job, and live in the same place, but they're like, hey, I don't want to drink this much anymore. And they start to make changes to their lifestyle. And I can give you some resources actually of people who I know who've done it that way and who've been very successful at it. But either way, I will tell you, you're going to face the discomfort of like making change, because at first change is always unfamiliar and uncomfortable and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You're going to like question who you are. You know, your friends might change. Your life is going to change essentially for the better, because if this is a desire that your body and your soul has, of course, it's only going to lead you in the right direction. But it may not seem that way in the messy middle at first, because everything gets changed around, especially if your life is as tied to drinking as mine was. My social life was tied to drinking. You're going to be like, oh my God, like, who are my friends? What do I like to do? You're going to like, it's going to be an identity crisis if you are really tied to drinking the way that I was. And that's okay. Like, that's supposed to happen. That's not like a mistake. It just is actually really fertile ground for you to, you know, it's the end of something, which means you are opening up the portal for something new and something better and something more aligned for you, right? In this stage of your life. So after Taiwan, I moved back to America to be with my now partner, Adam. At the time, he'd already been sober for like 5 years. And again, we've been together for 4 years. So now he's sober for 9 years. Yeah. And again, that was another really helpful thing for me. At first I was really worried, because I was like, oh, like, if I'm dating a totally sober person, does that mean that I can't drink anymore? And like, what if I want to drink? And like, you know, I had reservations about that. And it turned out to be a total blessing, because it turns out like I like my life when I'm not really drinking so much. Not only that, but I like myself more. That's huge. When I realize like I like myself when I'm like not, I like who I am, but I didn't get to discover that because I never had a chance to see like what that was like. Turns out I'm pretty freaking awesome when I'm not like wasted all the time. So it turned out to be really helpful that Adam didn't drink, because then I never felt, it wasn't that I didn't drink because I felt bad drinking around him, because the truth is he doesn't care if I drink. And now I will still, you know, I'll go out and have a glass of wine or whatever, and he doesn't care, because I think if you're really comfortable in your sobriety, it doesn't really bother you that much when people drink around you. But I will say, so it wasn't that I didn't drink because I felt bad. I just didn't drink because, again, like, the people who you keep around you have a huge effect on you. And so he didn't drink, then I didn't feel like a need to drink, and it was really, really great. And I guess what that really showed me was like, oh, like, life is, you know, this idea I think that people have, like, if I don't drink, my life is going to be boring. If I don't drink, like, I'm not going to be able to socialize or do things with people. And that's just like so not true. And I also think this idea of like, oh, well, you know, I need to make new friends. And that part I think might be true. And that's what happened with me and with Adam. It's just actually, sorry, I'm contradicting myself, because I've made a lot of new friends where drinking is just not part of our thing. And also my friends who were real friends, like friends who are your real friends, who aren't just based around partying and whatever, they'll stick around. Your superficial relationships will fall to the wayside. And that's kind of a good thing, right? Because it shows you, it does the work for you. Your reality will do the work for you, where it shows you like what's real and what's not. Let's see, what else? Okay, so fast forward, moving to Portland. Portland was interesting because I was nervous. I was like, I'm going to be moving back into a city where I have a lot of friends from New York and Portland and Philly, where I used to live and party and drink a lot. And they know that old version of me. And I was curious. I was like, I wonder if I'm going to fall back into old habits. If I'm going to like start drinking all the time again, even if I don't want to, because I feel the peer pressure, or because I feel like my friends are drinking, or because I'm being more social and like the pandemic is over and I'm like out and about more often. And what I realized is that I didn't have to fall back. That didn't happen, essentially. I didn't have to fall back into old habits, because what I realize is that the friends that I have here are friends who are not, they're real friends. They're not just friends based around superficiality. Like, we can hang out and I can drink or not drink, and it doesn't matter. Oftentimes what happens really is, like, my friends will drink, we'll go out to dinner, and I won't, and no one bats an eye, and it's like not a big deal. And I've really struck this beautiful relationship with alcohol, I think, where it does that. This is the point about why it's a spiritual thing, is because I feel like I've found freedom where I can drink if I want to drink, and I cannot drink if I don't want to drink. And that is the ultimate feeling of just being, actually, of just being free. People call it like, oh, it's moderation. I guess you could say it's moderation, but more than anything else, what I feel is that nothing outside of me is controlling me. I am controlling me. I get to make decisions based on what I really want and what I really feel. And again, this is sovereignty. I'm not making a decision based on anything outside of myself. It's always a free choice. It's not because of being compulsive. It's not because I'm avoiding anything. And I'm not drinking either because I'm like, oh, drinking is bad. And it's, like, that's not who I want to be. There's no moralistic judgment here, for me anyway, about whether drinking is good or bad. I don't see other people either and be like, oh, like, they shouldn't be drinking. It's such a clear feeling. This is my channel. It's totally clear. It's a non-issue. And that type, like, this is what I've wanted all along, is like this kind of freedom. And this is the kind of freedom that I want with like a lot of things in my life, essentially, where it doesn't trigger me and it doesn't affect me. And if I wanted to go out and get, have a celebratory night with my girlfriends for whatever reason, and I wanted to get drunk, it would be because I was like, I'm choosing to do that, and it's a choice, and there's also no guilt behind that. And it would just be really, really intentional, right? And if I don't drink, it's not because I'm like, oh, drinking is bad and like blah, blah, blah. It's just because I'm like, I don't want to, and I don't like it, and I don't feel like it tonight. Okay, I want to be clear that I'm in a place now where I feel like moderation, or really what I call sovereignty, is available to me. But that may not be the case for you, or for a lot of people out there, especially at the beginning, where moderation needs to be off the table, because you're in a place where it's actually just easier to make a black and white decision and to draw a line in the sand and say, hey, just for now, it's easier for me not to have the option. I'm just going to like cut out drinking, because then I won't have to negotiate in my mind. For some people, that might be the easier way. There's no right or wrong, but I will say I did kind of start from a place of being like, yeah, I think I did have a line in the sand where I was just like, I'm just not going to drink for a while. And then what happened was I just kind of realized, and this was over the course of years again, where I realized I like not drinking because I like myself and I like my life, and I built a life that I liked without drinking in it. And again, I didn't think that was possible for a really long time, but of course I didn't know it was possible because I had never tried, right? And then once I tried and I did it, I realized, oh, life is great. I don't have to drink. And oftentimes now I just find I don't want to drink because it doesn't really bring that much to the table anymore. It used to, because I think my table was more empty. Now my table is much more full. And so alcohol is just like, and I think that's kind of what happens for a lot of people when you go through this evolution. But again, I want to be clear, because I don't want people to think that like, oh, yeah, I should just go for moderation. And for some of you, moderation may not be an option, but you're going to have to be the decider. Yourself the best. And also it may not be available to you in the beginning, but over the years it may be. Okay. So I want to like tie this up in a clear way with some of my takeaways and what I think might be helpful for you if you also struggle with drinking or have a complicated relationship with alcohol and want to have essentially, like, again, this isn't about like not drinking anymore. This isn't about cutting out alcohol from your life, even though that's the language I've been using. It's about finding freedom and being able to make a choice instead of it being compulsive. This is about healing your relationship with whatever is underneath all of the stuff that's causing drinking, so that drinking doesn't necessarily have to be a thing that brings you suffering anymore. Because again, drinking is super prevalent in our society, that again, for a lot of people, I know that it's still something that can bring a lot of shame, a lot of confusion, a lot of frustration, a lot of guilt, just a lot of inner turmoil and inner conflict. And what I want for people who are struggling with that is no more inner conflict. Peace. I want you to the possibility of transcending beyond that is always available to you if you're willing to shine a light on the real source of suffering that's there. Okay, so let's get down to it. What do I mean by that? The first step, and I cannot emphasize this enough, if you do anything else, do this, because this in itself can, I think, transform your relationship and your energy around the confusion and conflict you have around drinking, is just to notice if there is internal conflict and any of those negative feelings I just mentioned, and offer yourself some serious, real self-compassion. Thank yourself for doing the best that you can, that you've been doing. Thank yourself for trying to protect yourself the way that you have been. Because for a lot of us, alcohol is, we think that it's our wires are crossed, but there's a part of us that does it because it's helpful in the moment. It's because it's bringing us comfort in the moment. It's because it's what we know how to do in the moment. So forgive yourself, like thank yourself, forgive yourself, apologize to yourself for being so hard on yourself, and say, hey, like, I see you. I see that you're just doing the best that you can. You're trying to protect me. And thank you. Like, thank yourself for doing really, like, again, doing what it thinks that you're supposed to be doing. Do you know what I mean? When you see it that way, like, there's a lot of self-compassion. And once you get out of like the shame and the guilt and the self-judgment and the internal conflict, you open yourself up for like a world of possibilities. But if you stay stuck in like judgment and like judgment, or like even this idea of like, okay, I'm gonna just have like one less drink today, or I'm gonna, instead of like one bottle of wine, I'm gonna just have two glasses. It's like all of this like calculation and bargaining that we do with ourselves. It's fucking exhausting. And then like that kind of living, I know it, and it's suffering. And I want to like sort of get out of that first by just you acknowledging yourself and giving yourself some love, especially because for a lot of you, who knows, like if drinking is a problem right now, it could be because you are mothering a bunch of kids in a pandemic. I mean, anyone in the pandemic, we all know that drinking has like gone up in the pandemic. And I would say with good reason, right? Like that's totally understandable. It doesn't mean that you have to continue that way, but at least if you can acknowledge yourself, like this is a hard time and you're going through some shit, that just can be such a helpful first step. The second thing that I think is really helpful, particularly for people whose social lives are really caught up in drinking, because this is a big part of it. A lot of the times people overdrink or drink more than they want to is truly just circumstantial. It's because of their job, it's because of their friends, it's because of their lifestyle. And I would say make some lifestyle changes. Make some new friends, find some new hobbies, maybe even like change your job if you need to. And I know, okay, so like you might be listening to me say this and be like, oh my God, what are you talking about? Like these are such huge demands, or huge changes that I need to make. Like it feels impossible. But really what I'm saying is, are you living the kind of life that you want to be living? Because chances are, if you like have a job that's really tied up in drinking and you don't really want to be drinking all the time, then that's probably not the job for you. And I also don't mean that you need to do this right away, right now. this is a long-term investment. This is like the long game. This is like, oh, I'm going to make real, sustainable, life-changing changes in my life. And in hearing me say that, some people might be like, yeah, I already get it. I know that I need to make new friends. I know that I need to not do this job anymore. Some people you already get it, but there are some people who might be at the beginning of this journey who can't even imagine making big changes like that. And to you, I just want to say, every single person I know who has had a difficult relationship with alcohol because it was very much tied into their lifestyle has made these big changes, and it's been hard at first, and then now it's just like their new norm, and it's really like, in hindsight, it's not a big a deal. I'm not saying this to gaslight you. I'm actually saying this in hopes that it can encourage you that, like, the brain is always going to tell us like it's so hard, it's impossible, but I want to assure you that it is not impossible. I have friends who were lifetime bartenders. Like, imagine your life as a bartender. Your whole social circle, your whole schedule is tied up in around drinking, who have changed their occupation because they just knew that wasn't sustainable anymore. And it was really great for them because that's exactly what they needed at the time. I know people who have, started just by making one other friend who, like, wanted to go hiking instead of going to the bar, like, who've joined, you join classes, you like meet new people, you learn about yourself really, and discover what you like to do that doesn't involve drinking. And then you start to do those things little by little. And it just makes a huge difference. Changing your circumstances can change everything if your life is really tied up in drinking. So again, I want to say it's like, it's hard, but not hard. It's hard, but not hard. Like, it's hard in that I want to assure you that your fears are valid, but I also want to assure you that it's 100% possible. And people who think that they can't do it at first always do it. Like, I'll do it all the time. And I'm one of those people. Again, I couldn't see a life outside that was any different from the one that I was living until I could. And then when I believed that it was possible, slowly over years, I made that happen to the degree, which is that I can't even like remember my old self anymore, because I think that's just what happens when you like are used to living more in the present moment. And because then you are just so fully who you are now, and you also recognize that this will also change. Who I am now, I already know I'm going to change. That's just life. And I'm not holding on so tight to any of it, which is why I used to have this thing where I used to really identify with my trauma. My trauma was who I was. I used to identify with all these different stages of who I was because I've had many different past lives. And I thought that was so important that I needed to hold on to my story. And now I'm at a place where I understand that is just, it's not true, because if you're evolving so quickly, you don't even remember kind of who you were. The core essence of you will always be the same, but the things that you identify, it's the things that you identify with just start to drop off to the point where you get to just be whoever you are now, and simultaneously honoring and opening up to who you are continuously becoming. So again, changing circumstances, I think, yeah, is really, can be really, really helpful. And again, if this is going to be different for you, but like, if you actually feel like you might be an alcoholic, I think AA is a really amazing, beautiful thing. It's actually mind-blowing how it's like basically one of the greatest self-help classes you could take, but for free. And if the religion stuff weirds you out, because it does for a lot of people, you don't have to, you can take what you like and leave the rest. And that's the whole thing about AA. The other thing that I think can be helpful is, when I talk about changing your circumstances, it's like changing the information that you're taking in, because drinking is so much of the norm in our society. Yeah, it just, we just take it for granted as if like this is how it is. But there are a lot of people out there sharing a lot of cool things, writing a lot of content about not drinking. And I'm gonna Holly Whitaker, she's I think you can find her on Instagram. I should like look her up because she is amazing. Holly, yeah, you can just find her as Holly. Holly Whitaker. She has wrote this book about not drinking, but not necessarily being in AA. She's really amazing. And also Joy Manning is another person who I love, who talks about not drinking and liking not drinking. She was also on an episode of Hello Universe podcast. I should probably leave all this information in the email itself. But there's some great people, you want to just start intaking the possibilities of like what it's like that you're like to not drink and have that become your new norm. And I think honestly, the biggest one out of all of this is looking at why you are drinking more than you want to. If you are drinking all the time and you don't want to be, and it's a source of suffering, we all know that really the course of action is to look at what's underneath all of that. What's driving you to drink more than you want to? And again, it could be that you're the mother of 3, and at the end of the day, it's just like the best for you to unwind. It might be because you're on, week 1000 of the pandemic in whatever country you're in, and it's like drinking is just like the best option that you have. And again, to forgive yourself and to see yourself and acknowledge yourself and maybe give yourself a break, but then also be like, but is that what I really, really want? And that's where like it becomes deeper work. And I think this is a good thing. Like using this as motivation to be like, but this isn't really what I want. So how can I start making little changes every day to change the real problem, instead of just using alcohol as a balm, as a band-aid over the thing? And if that is something that you need help with, then reach out for support, or get a community of people, or talk to people, or talk to your partner, who maybe is like the person that you drink with all the time. Like start having these conversations, and with the belief that there are other options available to you, because there always are. All right. I hope this is helpful. There's one more note that I wanted to say. The whole thing about like drinking and not drinking, again, this isn't about good or bad. It's about you being a free person. But I do know a lot of people who say that they feel like their spiritual gifts turn online when they are not, smoking and drinking as much. And I do think that there's some truth to that it's easier to touch into our own innate wisdom and our intuition when we're clear. But I also wouldn't say, that if that's a motivating factor for you, that's the experience of a lot of people that I know. I would say that that's true of myself too, but I just, I haven't really drank excessively for a long time now. So it's hard for me to discern, but I assume like if I was drinking all the time, I definitely wouldn't feel like as clear. So that can be a really motivating factor. I also don't want to make it sound like it's black and white. Like don't feel, if you want to have a drink, if you want to smoke because that's what you choose to do, and you feel truly, authentically, genuinely free and good about that, like it's coming from a place of personal power, then that is the thing that I think is most important, that you are making decisions that support your highest expansion on a moment by moment basis. And you do that by constantly checking in with yourself and being present. All right. I hope this is helpful. If you have any thoughts or questions or need some additional support, again, I'm not like the sobriety person. I'm not the alcohol person. There are a lot of other people who really specialize in this, but I'm always happy to have the conversation. All right. Bye, y'all.